4 more weeks. How are we going to survive it, Bernie? 4 more weeks of this? Or is it going to be 8? Or is it going to be 12? Do I hear 16?
Well,
when is this thing going
Gary,
to
can I say I'm amazed that you can actually hear me, because I almost lost my microphone when I jumped to my feet with applause at the editorial that you delivered to start the program, because I think what you said this evening sums it up beautifully. So well said, well done. We need more of that thinking in government, and not just thinking, but doing. Look, I think that we can get through the next month. I know we can get through the next month. I'm surprised that it's not going to be a little bit more. I had fully anticipated that we would be in this lockdown right through winter, and we wouldn't see the other side of these difficult times until spring. So if we can just put up with it for another month, well, that's well beyond my expectations. But my concern tonight, as a Victorian, is what we're going to do to survive what the Andrews government is suggesting, because we had the Treasurer on radio this morning saying that despite what the Prime Minister said about supporting free enterprise and business, Treasurer Pallas, he wants a more interventionist government in the economy. He said that's the answer. And then he went on to defend the Chinese government. He became a full-on apologist for the Chinese Communist Party. So as a Victorian tonight, I am very, very concerned. I mean, we knew and have known for a long time that this government is way to the left of anything we've ever seen before, but God, it looks like it just started. And that is a real concern to everybody down here.
Yeah, well, look, Daisy Cousins, I am gravely concerned about the left cheer squad. It's an international thing. It's all around the world in various different ways. People pop their head up and have a criticism of things that happen in Beijing, and woe betide anybody who says anything else. It's almost like a memo goes out. Everyone cops it. But this whole idea that you can tax yourself into prosperity is it's just bollocks.
Oh, of course it is. It is absolutely ridiculous to hear people pushing this kind of myth, particularly when we have over 100 years of history of socialist regimes, and how every single time this has been tried, it has led to poverty, it has led to starvation, it has led to violence, it has led to oppression, it has led to absolutely terrible horrors and corruption. And yet there are still far too many people around the world that tend to be misguided millennials, and I would like to take a moment here to apologise for the rank stupidity of my generation, but it's because we weren't around when the Soviet Union was booming. We didn't see any of that. So a lot of millennials tend to confuse socialism with what happens in Denmark and Sweden, these very, very highly taxed economies, highly taxed citizens, but who actually have very market-driven economies. So there's a bit of confusion there. But certainly opportunists in governments like the Andrews government, for instance, I mean, he's been loving having all this big government power. You can just see it in his eyes whenever he gives a press conference. Oh, my goodness. But to hear that he's talking about having a more of an interventionalist approach to the economy in Victoria, that's absolutely horrifying, and it's extremely exposing, and he needs to be relentlessly called out on that, because that only leads to misery.
Bronwyn Bishop, I mean, you're closer to Scott Morrison than I. I mean, you serve with Scott. I mean, I think that where Scott Morrison landed this yesterday, when he started to talk about the fact we need a business-led recovery, he really wants those who want to be the innovators to get up and go. Well, then what the government's got to do is to get out of the way, surely.
Absolutely, Gary. And indeed, the two most important statements I think Scott has made is that we have two problems, health and the economy, and the economy has to be paid attention to. But I honestly could not believe that a Liberal government would suggest compulsory tracking of all our citizens. That's what happens in China. That's the sort of thing that happens in totalitarian states, not in a freedom-loving country like ours. We had Malcolm Turnbull brought socialism into the Liberal Party, and the legacy of that has to be buried. You know, he's the one who made us completely reliant on China. He's the one that signed the French submarine deal. He's the one that ratified the Paris Agreement. He's the one that's responsible for the mess of the Murray-Darling Basin. And he's the one that has made the doctrine of climate change one that decimated our industry. Now, all of that has to be turned around. And all the things that have been spoken about where we go when we come out of this has to be front and centre of the mind, and certainly taxing ourselves out of the problem is certainly not the way to go. We need a free enterprise economy. But right now, the sorts of things that are being brought in by, like in Victoria and indeed in Queensland, where you've got Labor governments, how are we going to wind all this back? We said there's going to be a bridge and we're going to get out of it at the other end. But no, we can't have this sort of impingement on our freedom and our this sort of freedom is a word that gets bandied around. What I mean by it is that individuals are able to use their own skills and abilities to do something that is beneficial for themselves, but for their country as well. And I love this country with a passion, Gary, and I can't bear to see what we seem to be acquiescing in without realising how we're going to get that way of life back.
No, well, and Bronwyn, I once gave a speech in my final year in the Parliament about the fact that when Labor is in government, it creates a lot of victims, that the left love victims. They love to create victims. They like people to feel like victims. Of course, when they're victims, they tend to want to run to welfare. I actually think most people want to have the dignity of doing for themselves and the dignity of knowing that they don't owe a dollar to government, that government's out of their lives. But anyway, that's a point I'm going to keep putting on this program.